I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safe.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to another episode of Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 391. It is our second episode of 2024. Thank you so much for listening again this week. For those of you who are longtime listeners to the show, welcome back. Thank you so much for your continued support. And for those of you who are new, welcome. Hope you will stick around and check out the back catalog and come and join us again for future episodes. Before I start, I do want to apologize for the nasally sound of my voice. Allergies are a wonderful thing. Today, I do want to discuss a touchy subject, guns and mental health. And before we do that, I do want to send a big thank you, a big shout out to the members of the Reformation Gun Club who are making this show possible again in 2024. And this week's shout out goes out to Paul from McKinney, Texas, Stuart from Pensacola, Florida, Greg from Holly, Michigan, JJ from Toms River, New Jersey, Daniel from Chehalis, Washington, Edwin from Round Lake Beach, Illinois, Steve from Grovetown, Georgia, Dan from Enumclaw, Washington, Frank from Lake City, Michigan, and Catherine from Casper, Wyoming. Thank you all so much for your support, and thank you to all of the members of the Reformation Gun Club. Armed Lutheran Radio is listener-funded. That means we don't have any advertising. We don't have any sponsors. If you would like to sponsor the show, become a member. It's really easy. Go to reformationgunclub.com. We have a single membership tier. It's $36 a year. You get some cool Armed Lutheran swag. You get access to all of the exclusive content on the website. You get invitations to our monthly online hangouts. I need to plan the February hangout as we are now into February. And of course, you get the satisfaction of knowing that you helped make our 9th year possible. So check it out again, reformationgunclub.com, or look for a link in the show notes for this or any of our previous episodes. All right, let's talk about guns and mental health, shall we? Fun subject, I'm sure. This is on my mind because the case of the manslaughter trial of the mother of a Michigan school shooter is going on as we speak, and she took the stand in her own defense Wednesday, I think, Tuesday or Wednesday of this week. And I think it's safe to say that every mass shooting, every school shooting we've seen over the past, 3 decades probably, going back to Columbine, maybe every mass murder of all time, I think you could probably say is tied in some way to mental health or the lack thereof. Like I say, we're currently talking about the manslaughter trial of the mother of a Michigan school shooter who will not be named. The boy was clearly mentally unstable, but the parents gave him access to guns nonetheless. And I have maintained for many years that I think that it is right and proper in the case of a young person getting their hands on firearms and causing harm to other people, that the parents are ultimately responsible and should be held accountable. Now, whether that accountability is a criminal proceeding or a civil one, I will leave that up to other people to decide. After all, if you can criminally charge or sue someone for allowing their dog off the leash or out of the yard to maul, a neighborhood kid, then surely we can hold parents accountable for the actions of their children when the negligence of the parent allowed a tragedy to happen. I've constantly been bombarded lately for some reason by video ads on YouTube for Sandy Hook Promise, as the parents of the victims of the Sandy Hook school shooting in Newtown, Connecticut many years ago are pleading for a new ban on so-called assault rifles. But the problem, like with the Michigan case, is not guns, it's mental health and it's access to guns. In the Newtown Sandy Hook case, you had a young man who was clearly mentally ill, and yet his mother gave him access to firearms. He ultimately killed her and took her guns and committed the shooting that took place at Sandy Hook Elementary School. And the case in Michigan is very similar in that respect. And I want to read and react to an article to start off, reading and reacting to an article from the Associated Press about this case. This is from Pontiac, Michigan. The mother of a Michigan school shooter testified in her own defense Thursday, denying any responsibility for the deaths of 4 students, but also wishing her son would have, quote, killed us instead. Quote, I don't want to say that I'm a victim because I don't want to disrespect those families that truly are the victims on this, Jennifer Crumbly told the jury, but we did lose a lot. You lost everything, said attorney Shannon Smith. We did, Crumbly replied at the end of an afternoon of testimony in which she rejected blame for the gun used by her son and denied claims that she ignored his mental health. Jennifer Crumbly, age 45, and husband James, age 47, are accused of making a gun accessible at the home and not addressing their son's mental care. They are the first parents in the U.S. to be charged in a mass school shooting committed by their child, and their son pulled a handgun from his backpack and shot 11 people on November 30th, 2021, killing 4. The attack came a few hours after school staff had summoned his parents to a meeting to discuss a violent drawing on a math assignment. The Crumblies declined to take the child home, and the shooting ensued. Quote, as a parent, you spend your whole life trying to protect your child from other dangers, Jennifer Crumbly told the jury. You never would think to have to protect your child from harming someone else. That's what blew my mind. I have asked myself if I would have done anything differently. I wouldn't have. I wish he would have killed us instead, she said. Now, this is where I take I sympathize to some degree with her. I agree they have lost a lot. Certainly they are not victims in the sense that the parents of the children killed and injured are. And I have some sympathy for them, but at the same time, I'm a little taken aback by her unwillingness to accept any responsibility here. She took the stand after days of unflattering evidence about her meeting at the school, an extramarital affair, not sure what that has to do with anything except to smear her reputation, a deep concern about the welfare of her horses after the tragedy, as opposed to her seeming lack of concern for her son or the victims, and then the emptying of a $3,000 bank account with her son's name on it. She said she had no role in buying or storing the handgun used by her son and instead shifted responsibility to her husband. Quote, I just didn't feel comfortable being in charge of that. It was his thing, Jennifer Crumbly said of her husband, turning to the jurors as she spoke. No, you are a parent. You are the parent of this child, and we're talking about a deadly weapon being stored in your home. That's not something that you just don't feel comfortable talking about. You have a role in the home, And if you feel any sort of discomfort or if you have any concern, you speak it. This is just negligence on her part. Whether she had any role in buying the gun or not, she knew it was there. She knew it existed. She knew it was being made, how it was being stored, and she knew it was being made accessible to her son. So she has some responsibility here. She can't just shirk that off and blame her husband. The boy was with his father when the handgun was purchased, just 4 days before the shooting. Jennifer Crumbly took her son to a shooting range and posted photos of the trip on social media. So between the time that the gun was purchased, 4 days, just 4 days before the school shooting, she took him to the range. But now she's throwing up her hands and denying any role in handling or storing the gun. But she said the gun was kept in a locked box with a key kept in a beer stein. Not good enough. That's not good enough. I'm sorry. Gun safes with manual locks, key-based locks, are a bad idea, especially in a home with children, and especially if your kids are old enough to, if your kids are old enough to handle a firearm, as this young man obviously was, keeping the keys in a beer stein is a just dumb, flat out stupid idea. So based on that alone, I hope she's found guilty. Prosecutors last week presented the boy's own text messages. This is interesting, from spring of 2021, in which he told his mom that demons were throwing bowls and clothes were flying off the shelf at home. But Jennifer Crumbly said it was just her son messing around. He's been convinced that our house has been haunted since 2015, she said, adding that her son called the ghost Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson, the former Prime Minister of Great Britain, is the name of the ghost in the house. And she thinks he's just messing around. She doesn't see that as a sign that maybe there's something wrong. Earlier in the day, an investigator read portions of the boy's journal to the jury. And here's some of the excerpts. I have zero help for my mental problems, and it's causing me to shoot up the school, he wrote at age 15. My parents won't listen to me about help or therapist, he wrote. But his mother said she saw no mental health problems. There were a couple of times when he expressed anxiety over taking tests, she said. Anxiety about what he was going to do after school, college, military, but not at the level where I felt he needed to see a psychiatrist or a mental health professional. Well, obviously the boy thought otherwise. Even the boy was admitting in his own journal there's something wrong. But mom didn't see it, and now she's trying to wash her hands of it and blame everyone else. No, sorry, this is on you. You can't just... See, the problem here, the root of the problem, I think, goes back to mental health and the stigma associated with it. And we see this in sports, for example. There's no stigma associated with a knee injury, for example, or an ankle injury. Maybe there's a stigma for a toe injury when we see, huge guys like LeBron James flop around on the court like he's been mortally wounded. But then at the same time, you can turn to a hockey game and watch a player get his face sliced open with a skate blade and go to the locker room, get it stitched up, and then come back out in the next period. But I digress. My point is that when there's a physical injury, we understand it. But when the problem is with the mind, we don't. mainly because despite all the advances in science and medicine, we still don't fully understand, societally, we don't understand how the brain works. It's why the gay and the trans pride movements lobbied so hard to have their conditions removed from the diagnostic tools that classified their conditions as mental illness. It's perfectly natural. It's not a mental illness, they say. It's genetic, even though there's no basis in fact for that claim. In reality, those things have always been considered mental illnesses. But that's not my point. I bring that up only to underscore how much we've stigmatized mental illness and how hard we will fight to avoid the label. It is heartening in recent years to see more ads for therapy and counseling, trying to, explain to people that there is no shame in recognizing that you need help and seeking help. It's good that we see sports leagues recognizing this as well, and players are given time and help away from the game to get the help that they need. And of course, the biggie is the 22-minute thing, the fact that every 22 minutes we see a veteran commit suicide on average. But as a society, we think, big, tough warriors, they're out, they're shooting guns and they're fighting for our freedoms, but, how can they possibly need help for mental health issues? They're tough. It's always been considered a sign that you're soft, that you're weak if you have a mental illness. It's made fun of rather than being taken seriously. And too often, parents like this woman in this case don't want to see the problem in their own kids. We don't want to see the signs of autism. We don't want to see the signs of depression or anger or anxiety. We want to sleep soundly thinking the kids are all right, when too often they're not. And the world will convince them they're not if you're not careful. I put out a new single on Spotify this week. Shameless plug. It's called Inevitable Catechesis. Go look for that on Spotify and wherever you download music. It will soon be available from the band Lloyd. It's based on an article that I read years ago. I think it was, if I recall correctly, it was on a blog called The Jagged Word. And the author, a Lutheran pastor, had posited correctly, I think, that if you don't teach your children, if you don't teach them God's word and God's truth, if you don't show them the way, the wicked world will do it for you. They will teach them instead. And that's inevitable. But it's only inevitable if you don't protect them. And clearly the parents of the Michigan school shooter did not see the problem. And it's natural that we who are gun enthusiasts, we want to share our passions for the Second Amendment, for gun rights, for hunting, for competitive shooting, for recreational shooting, whatever, with our kids, because we want to spread that, we want to spread that joy to them. We want them to appreciate their freedoms, and so that the next generation and future generations will be able to enjoy those rights and not surrender them. But we need to be clear-minded about mental health, though. If you see signs of trouble in yourself, in your child, in your loved ones, in your friends, you can't just give them, you don't ignore it. You can't, but you cannot, when it's under your control, you cannot give them unfettered access to firearms. You can't just lock a gun away and put the keys in a beer stein. Maybe you're accustomed to having guns staged around the house for home defense. And if you do, and you've got children in the home, children who are old enough to access them, you need to keep them in safes. Maybe you don't stage them in safes. And if you do, I think that's incredibly dangerous and stupid. if you have children in your home. But maybe you don't have kids. Maybe it's just you and the missus, you and your spouse. If you see signs of depression or self-harm, anxiety, suicidal ideation, you need to make sure that that person does not have access to your firearms. Maybe it's a roommate. Maybe it's someone who's not related to you. You have to make sure that they don't have access to those firearms. I have a friend whose wife has been suffering with depression for years. And he told me once that she had threatened suicide in the past. And he said that the hardest thing to do was to lock the guns up and change the locks on the safes so that she didn't have access to them. And she complained to him all the time that, what am I going to do? I'll be helpless if something happens when you're not home. And that thought worries him as well. And we talked about that. And what I told him was, statistically, the chance that your wife is going to need to use that gun for home defense is probably lower than the chance that she might misuse that gun if she's in some sort of fit of depression or if she starts to think about harming herself. You have to take it seriously. You have to set aside your pride. If your kid is struggling, that's not your fault. But if you do nothing like this woman did in Michigan and your negligence leads to their death or to the deaths of others, well, that is your fault. We're called in the fifth commandment to protect our neighbor. Not only are we not to murder them, as it says that you shall not murder, but we're also called to do what we can to protect them where possible, to prevent them from being murdered. And who is your closest neighbor if not your family, if not your wife, your husband, your children? And you need to protect them. That means protecting them from themselves sometimes. And there's no shame in that. So pay attention to your spouse, to your kids, to your roommates. Speak frankly to them about their feelings. I know as men, talking about feelings is never easy, but it's a far sight easier than planning a funeral or testifying in court because that person did something terrible. As I say in this song that I mentioned earlier, the devil's hungry. He's a hungry beast prowling around, looking for his next meal. And if you don't recognize the warning signs, the devil will make a meal of your loved ones. So let me finish here by quoting the title of an excellent book that you should all go out and buy and read. You have a duty to defend. And that duty is more than just protecting them with your guns. Sometimes it means protecting them from your guns. All right, that's all I have for today. If you have any comments, if you have any questions or complaints, if you disagree, you agree, I'd love to hear from you. Visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or send me a message through the Facebook group page or send me a voicemail on the feedback page. I'd love to hear from you. Tune in again next week for episode 392. We are trekking our way towards episode 400. Until we get together again for episode 392, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio. a member of the Self Defense Radio Network.